What's up everyone, I'm Jacob, also known as Jonesy, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about the most recent nostalgix webcam tournament on the nostalgix Discord, where I played my Brekon Biibii burn deck, or as I like to call it, BiiBiiBiiBii. But before I go over the deck list and talk about my matches, if you have not subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to be notified every time I put out a new video. Now, I originally made this deck before Harmonic Surge was released. The goal of the deck was to find a way to handle my opponent playing a turn 1 Voodoo if I was going second. My solution to that was to play BiiBii and a bunch of cheap burn spells, since BiiBii causes all of your spells and surprises to deal 1 extra damage. And to help with that, I also decided to play Brekon the Miner as my hero. Now, if we do go second, we do gain the extra mana token, but I really do not want to use it on my first turn if I have to, so I have Brekon to give myself extra mana instead. Now, we are playing 4 copies of BiiBii since the deck is designed around her. She costs 1 mana, comes into 3 health, and has a 1 damage attack. Although the main part about BiiBii is the fact that all of her spells and surprises do deal 1 extra damage. We're also playing 2 copies of BiiBii's evolved form, Scaffa. Scaffa costs 4 mana, comes into 7 health, and causes spells and surprises to deal 2 extra damage. I'm only running 2 because BiiBii is going to be a big target to our opponent, so loading up on a lot of the second level evolution fighters is probably not going to work out well for us. And it's because of that I'm not actually running any of the third evolution fighters too. I'm not running any Silcastas or any 3rd level fighters in any of the other lines. Now besides BiiBii, we also have 4 copies of Farn to help with our aggro plan. Farn is a 1 mana fighter that comes with 3 health and has a 2 damage attack, which is very important to helping us kill our opponent's early 1-drops that have 3 health. Farn also has Life Touch, so every time it deals damage, our hero heals the same amount. And because we're going to be losing a lot of life with Brekon, getting back extra health with the Life Touch is going to help us a lot. I'm also playing 2 copies of Valhalla. This is the evolved form of Farn. It costs 4 mana, also comes into 7 health, and has a 5 damage attack, which also has Life Touch. Next up, we have 4 copies of the first Harmonic Surge card, Bullfrog. This is a 2 mana fighter, which comes with 2 health and 2 armor. And even though it can't attack 2 turns in a row, it does have a 5 damage attack, which is going to kill a lot of early things. Our goal basically with this deck is to clear out all of our opponent's early fighters, and if we can clear out enough of our opponent's early fighters, and then by the time they play out their bigger threats, we'll have enough of board presence where even though we don't have a lot of ways to deal a lot of damage all at once, we should have a lot of smaller ways to deal a small amount of damage multiple times. I'm also playing 1 copy of Krokro, the evolved form of Bullfrog. It's a 5 mana fighter, has 5 health and 2 armor, and it also cannot attack 2 turns in a row, but it does deal 10 damage on an attack. Now to help us with our aggro plan, we're also playing 4 copies of Afri. She's a 2 mana fighter with 3 health, and once per turn, you can discard a card to give another fighter charge, so it can attack the turn it comes in. There's not a lot to say about Afri besides the fact that it is amazing with an aggro plan, and even though we're not playing any of the evolved copies of Afri, we don't actually need them. All we need is an Afri in play, and just using this to discard cards and give fighters charge will really help us speed up our game plan. The last fighters in the main deck is Puppet Master Wrong. I'm playing 4 copies of this card because it is arguably one of the best fighters. He's a 3 mana fighter with 5 health and has charge, so he can attack right away. When he attacks, you can either deal 0 damage and create a 2 health 1 attack puppet token to taunt, or else you deal 3 damage for each puppet in play. Not only is Puppet Master Wrong great at slowing down your opponent, but if you have multiples of these in play, they become very dangerous to your opponents. So those are the fighters. Now onto these spells. We're playing 4 copies of Spark Bolt. Spark Bolt is a 0 mana spell which deals 1 damage to anything. And while the 1 damage may not seem like a lot, we are playing BiiBii, so there are a lot of times where this will deal 2 damage instead. There are also a lot of random cards which make tokens, and Spark Bolt can help a lot at clearing out the tokens. Next up, we're playing 4 copies of Pins and Needles. This is a 1 mana spell which deals 2 damage to anything. Pins and Needles is the main burn spell we want to see if our opponent is playing 1-drops, because we can play this and we can play our BiiBii and deal 3 damage to the first 1-drop they play. Next up, we're playing 2 copies of Chain Lightning. It is a 3 mana spell which deals 3 damage to a fighter and 1 damage to each fighter adjacent to it. And while the 1 damage to the other fighters adjacent to it may not seem like a lot, if we have a BiiBii in play, This will deal 4 damage to the target fighter, and then 2 damage to the fighters adjacent to it, so BiiBii can help spread out the damage a lot with Chain Lightning. Next up, we have 2 copies of Biceptus Blast. This is a 4-mana spell that deals 5 damage to anything, or 7 damage if we have a Biceptus in play. Even though we don't have Biceptus in this deck, dealing 5 damage to something is very useful, since there are some fighters which have a lot of health which you can sometimes struggle to kill. So we have Biceptus Blast to help deal with those threats. We're also playing 1 copy of Soul Jar Dice. It's a 5-mana spell, you roll a d10 and deal that much damage to up to 2 enemy fighters. Because we get to roll the d10 before we choose which 2 enemy fighters we target with this, a low roll is not as useless as you'd think. Also, BiiBii does increase damage dealt to both of the enemy fighters. And lastly, for the damage spells, we have 2 copies of Towerfall. It's a 6-mana spell, and it deals damage equal to your opponent's hand size to all of their fighters, and you draw 2 cards. Towerfall is very useful, especially against decks that go wide, because you're able to deal a lot of damage to everything and draw 2 cards to fill your hand back up and draw more action. Next up for the surprises, we have 1 2-mana surprise. This is Banana Peel. If a fighter of ours is attacked, you pause the attack and deal 3 damage to the attacking fighter. The attack is then resumed if the attacking fighter is not killed, but still, dealing 3 damage as a surprise is a great way to trick your opponents. Next up, we're playing 3 copies of Nope. I was worried about facing someone who had my Shiiga Turbo Draw deck, so I have 3 Nopes to try and stop that deck. In case you're wondering, I did not play my Shiiga Turbo Draw deck in this tournament because I felt like people would be ready for it. So I decided to play something else to throw people off, but one of these days I'm going to play Shiiga Turbo Draw again, and hopefully surprise some people when they're not expecting it. Next up, I'm playing 2 copies of Save the Day. It's a 3-mana surprise where you pay 5 your hero's health to void and negate a fighter when it's played. Because our deck sometimes has trouble against bigger fighters, this is a great way to just get rid of the fighter and not have to worry about it. And even though our hero does lose 5 health, it's absolutely worth it. And lastly for the surprises, we're playing 1 copy of Mixtape. I have Mixtape in instead of the 4th Nope against the Shiiga Turbo Draw deck, mostly just to see if it'd be worth it, because Mixtape could steal an opponent's Wish Upon a Frog. And lastly, in the main deck, we have 3 arenas. We have 3 copies of Mob Arena. For 3 mana, we play it, and then once per turn, you can pay 2 mana and search your deck for a fighter that costs 3 or less, then reveal it and put it into your hand. Because we have a lot of cheap spells and cheap fighters, we do get low on cards in hand very often. So Mob Arena is our plan to refill our hand back with fighters. Now onto the sideboard. I ended up running a 2nd copy of Krokoror. I did end up playing 2 copies of Afrida, the evolved form of Afri. I contemplated whether to put these in the main deck or the sideboard, and I could not think of better sideboard options, but I decided to try 2 in this sideboard just to see if there are any situations where I felt like I needed Afrida. Also decided to play 2 copies of Fish Out of Water. This is a 4-mana fighter with 7 health and is immune to binding. Its breakout attack does 6 damage, which is a lot, but instead of dealing damage, you can also remove one of the weaknesses from one of your fighters and make them immune to binding also. I was worried about binding effects, so Fish Out of Water was my answer to that. Sideboard also had a 2nd copy of Soul Jar Dice. I almost put this in my main deck too, but I struggled a lot leading up to the tournament about what to cut from the main deck. A lot of the last cards I kept from the main deck, like the other 2nd level evolution fighters and the Soul Jar Dice, I ended up just moving to the sideboard instead. Next up on the sideboard, I have 2 copies of Expensive Card. It is a 4-mana surprise that removes a fighter from the game, but its owner can later cast it by paying 10 mana. I was worried about some show-off decks, so Expensive Card was one of my answers to help with that, instead of just relying on Nopes. Next up, I had a 4th copy of Nope in my sideboard, because I felt like I needed extra cards in my sideboard to help against the Shiiga Turbo Draw matchup. And I also have 1 copy of Reverse. It's a 3-mana surprise, which negates the surprise, and the player who owned that surprise draws a card, which is a downside. However, so far, Reverse is the only surprise which can actually counter another surprise, and there are times where it is going to be necessary. So that was the deck list. I struggled a lot coming up with a final list for this deck, because Harmonic Surge gave a lot of extra options to the deck compared to just the base set. So I did end up sideboarding some cards which I cut from the main deck, just in case there are matchups where I did actually want them. So in the tournament, there were 5 people who played in the tournament. My first matchup was against Mini Minnow. He won 2 of the previous webcam tournaments, and I have actually played him a lot just at local LGSs. Against Minnow, my deck actually worked very well. His hero that's starting off was Nakira, Minnow's favorite. Nakira makes 0 attack 1 health taunt tokens. Because I have Spark Bolts and a lot of cheap burn, the taunt tokens weren't too much of a problem for me. I was easily able to burn and attack his other fighters. I was also lucky to draw a lot of Puppet Master Wrongs, which did not have a great plan to deal with right away, so my Puppet Master Wrongs did get out of hand quickly. In the second game, he did switch out Nakira for a King Frigis, which gives lucky shield counters. But as we found out, those lucky shield counters do not actually stop burn spells, only attacks. So I was still able to burn out all the fighters that he gave a lucky shield counter to. Now my second matchup was against Elusive, who also had a Brekon aggro deck. And this match went basically the opposite of how my first match went. This deck is designed to get ahead early and stay ahead with a bunch of burn spells. But Elusive's deck was specifically designed to get ahead even better than my deck, so I was on the defensive from basically my first turn. His deck also utilized a lot of equipment spells to play on Brekon to give himself an extra attacker. And unfortunately, there aren't any surprises which can counter an equipment spell yet. So I did not have a great way to deal with his equipments which he played on Brekon. And because of that, and him also playing Afri to give his fighters charge, he was able to clear out all of my fighters before I could kill his. It was very clear from even just partway through the first game that Elusive was a lot better prepared for this tournament than me. Because I did throw in a lot of changes to this deck at the last minute, I did not have a lot of time to test them. Elusive's deck was very well tuned, and he definitely deserved to get the win this tournament, so congrats to you, Elusive. And I feel like Brekon aggro decks using Afri to give everything charge are going to be very strong in this new Harmonic Surge meta. So overall, how do I feel about BiiBiiBiiBii? Well, I think the deck is okay. The deck does show a lot of promise, but I feel like there are some definite problems with the deck. I feel like having Fish out of the water in the main deck is the right way to go, just because they do deal 6 damage on an attack. Also, because we do need to be more aggressive in order to keep up with Elusive's deck, I do think we need to cut all of our second evolution fighters and just play more first evolution fighters. Almost all of our second evolution fighters in this deck cost 4 mana, so I think instead of playing those, just playing some Fish Out of Waters, or maybe some of the Gamatron mechs. Also, one of the cards which I cut at the last minute from the deck was Biceptus. If we do have Biceptus in the deck, our Biceptus Blast will be able to deal 7 damage. I did end up cutting the Biceptuses because I did not have a lot of water-type fighters in the deck, besides the Wrongs and sometimes the Fish Out of Waters if I board them in. So I did not think Biceptus would be worth it, but I think it might actually be worth it. So if you want to see me play a Brekon Biibii Biceptus burn deck or a BiiBiiBiiBii deck, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you in the next video.